Welcome to Voice for Infection Prevention, where we explore the latest developments, challenges, and insights in the field of infection prevention and control. With a passion for promoting patient safety and healthcare excellence, we're excited to bring you engaging discussions with experts, leaders, and innovators in the field. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just beginning your journey in infection prevention, welcome to the conversation. This is Voice for Infection Prevention.
Welcome back to Voice for Infection Prevention. I'm your host, Jacob Hutcherson. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Kate Maguire. Kate currently holds the position of Director of Infection Prevention at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, bringing her wealth of experience and leadership to the forefront of pediatric healthcare. Previously, she served as the Director of Infection Prevention at Marshfield Clinic, where she made significant contributions to the field. With an impressive educational background, including an MS in biology, an MPH, and her certification in infection control, Kate's dedication to infection prevention has been unwavering since her career began in 2011. In this episode, we'll explore Kate's career journey. At the time of this interview, Kate was still a Director of Infection Prevention overseeing Marshfield Clinic. We'll delve into the challenges she's faced and the strategies she's employed to drive positive change in infection prevention practice. With her extensive experience and academic achievements, Kate serves as an inspiration to infection preventionists everywhere. Join us as we uncover the insights and wisdoms she's gained throughout her already remarkable career. Now, let's jump right into our discussion with Kate Maguire and uncover the insights she offers on achieving success in infection prevention from her unique perspective.
This episode is sponsored by Clutch Recruitment, the leading recruiting firm in the country, recruiting exclusively within infection prevention and control.
My background, I am someone who did not figure out what they wanted to do until later in life. That's why I've acquired 2 master's degrees. It was originally supposed to be on the PhD path, but I had, so what happened to me, what changed me from a bench microbiologist, I was a really good bench microbiologist. I worked with biofilms a lot, which as an IP has been really cool to kind of see in the clinical space. But what really changed my life was my mom had a ruptured brain aneurysm, and it was very, very sudden, didn't have any warning. And we were told very quickly in that process, if she develops an infection, she will die. And that was really, really this culmination of years worth of my parents saying the hospitals where people get sick. We don't take antibiotics willy-nilly. I think I had a whole childhood that prepared me for this role in really crazy ways as I look back. But my mom is fine now. We are 13 years out. I always like to end that. I always like to get to the end of that really quickly.
Yeah.
But it really changed how I looked at the world. As good as I was with bugs on the bench, I really wanted to work with people. And part of the way through my PhD program, my PI ended up transferring to the University of Michigan, and has a very strong IP program. And they were running their first internship ever. I had a friend in another lab say, "Isn't this what you want to do? Work with bugs, work with people?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know what infection prevention is, and I'm not a second-year MPH student. Why would they take me?" And he said, "Try." And I was the youngest in my career process intern, in the first ever CHIP class at a University of Michigan. And that was it, working with the Michigan infection prevention team. That was it. Solidified everything I wanted to do with my life. This culmination of working with people, working with microbes came together, and this is where I feel like I've needed to be ever since.
So how long had you worked in that before you jumped into the infection prevention internship?
I had actually not started my MPH yet. I've been finishing up a master's degree because I was in this weird territory where my old university wasn't going to let me continue going there because my PI left the institution.
Gotcha.
So I was finishing up a master's degree. I was there my first year working at the University of Michigan, working with microbes and biofilms on a lab bench.
Gotcha. So how long was the internship?
It started as a summer internship. It lasted all the way through December, and they had someone leave, and I ended up training someone there. So
Okay.
that was a really cool experience working with a lot of data, doing a lot of that data analyst work, really getting my feet wet into infection prevention there. And then I took a second internship my next year at the state of Michigan in their infection prevention program, the SHARP unit. I can't remember what that stands for, but working with infection prevention at the state level, my primary project was working on an assessment of hospital versus long-term care infection prevention programs and where there are some needs in long-term care, which is still a issue that resounds to this day, to the point where CMS in 2022 decided they were going to make infection prevention a necessity, which is a long time coming. So
Right.
yeah, that was my second internship, and it really just solidified this is what I want to do for a living, and just needed to find my start.
Okay. Well, let me dive into that just for a second, because there's a ton, especially recently, of MPH grads that specialize in epidemiology and kind of have an idea of what they want to do, just don't know how to get that foot in the door. So you mentioned you were approached, I guess, by a place that you already worked and encouraged to take the internship. Is that how
I
that kind of
just
opened
had a
up?
friend that said, "Why don't you apply?" What is the worst that they could say is no. And
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think a disservice we do, especially for young people, it's something I've wanted to do at my own high school, is I had no idea that this was a career path. I had no idea public health was a career path as a young person. You think of all the careers that are presented to you: doctor, lawyer, police officer, firefighter. No one talks about public health personnel or talks of it out of the context of being a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really kind of cool. I find it very interesting that this program was just starting. I had a friend say, "This sounds like what you want to do. Why don't you just go for it?" And
Now, what?
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
no, you're good.
Well, was this internship specifically for MPH students?
It was. And I was just going to start my first year as an MPH. I just gotten accepted to the
Okay.
University of Michigan. So they were all second years. They were all in their summer between year one and year two. I was the only year one
Okay.
MPH.
So you weren't lumped into a team of RNs. This
No,
was a role specifically crafted for MPH students.
yeah, and that was the University of Michigan's CHIP program, which still is out there. It's one of the few, and I know they're growing all the time, public health programs that does a certificate in infection prevention.
Gotcha.
So I was able to earn that in my MPH program as well. So it was something I was always kind of dialed in. I think I was at the right time. I was in the right place at the right time. And, we think of the MPH programs that turn out amazing IPs: University of Michigan, Johns Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
We think of where those they feed into academically, and those are pretty highly MPH based programs. So I think it's the new frontier. As an MPH, I know I have deficits that a nurse does not have. And that's why I really, really grabbed on in my first role to nursing leaders, nursing educators. The halftime RN that worked with me in infection prevention was a 40-year EDRN prior to infection prevention. And I thought, in the beginning, especially though this is my first job, I'm going out there into the world. And what I needed to do was really back off and say, "You don't know anything about working in a hospital." I was told, "Oh, you are never going to get a job as an infection prevention without clinical experience." And that's simply not true. But you need to be really careful of who your mentors are. So what I did a lot, and it is something that I've gotten better at over the years, is get endlessly curious. Um, I had a lot of really wonderful nursing educators at McLaren Greater Lansing put their arms around me and say, "We're treating you like a nursing student. So let's get back to the beginning here." I spent a lot of time in the ICUs. I just spent a lot of time wanting to learn from people, get to know people. And they would do things like, hey, we're going to throw you in a room where there's an intubation happening, or hey, we're going to put in a line, or, get on the wall like the med students and the nursing students. And that was really, really helpful for me as someone who does not have clinical experience. I know a lot of the folks at Michigan, at least when I was there, had clinical experience of some kind. They were RNs and MPHs. They had other roles within the facility, but I was told, you're going to need some type of clinical experience. And I was like, well, I would love to be, if I was to choose one role, and I still feel like this, an anesthesia tech. I think that would be a good role for me. I also love transport. I did a lot of transport during the pandemic. I think it's really neat. You get to meet lots of people and just be able to have some type of clinical experience. But what I did was really open myself up, which is hard. I think, especially as you're young, you're new, you're starting out, to what opportunities do I have to learn? And I know I don't have all the answers. How do I get this group of people to trust me if I can't even speak their language? So that was huge in the beginning, being able to take that step back and say, I have all this book knowledge and I have a good amount of practical knowledge, but how do you translate into working in a high stress environment with staff? And you do that by walking alongside people, by building relationships. This is a relationships job. This is not a book smarts, data smarts. All that is great. If you can't build with people, you will never be able to make change. So it's really, really important. So I feel really blessed that as an NPH with no clinical experience going in, being able to say, I know there's so much I don't know. How can I learn from you to others? And that really built me for my career. People tell me now that I sound like a nurse. And I'm like, oh, you don't you don't want me interfacing with you like a nurse. But you have to. I will tell people I've never taken an anatomy and physiology class in my life. I've never had any basic clinical skills, but I have to know the processes of how we do all these things. I've watched surgery. I've watched surgery on YouTube. You do everything you can to build yourself in that clinical space when that is your deficit. But you can also bring to the table so much when it comes to data, so much when it comes to understanding best practices and processes. That's really where you can shine in that role.
That's great. So let's dive in here. You said you did an internship that basically, you say 2 internships you had for basically a year of interns. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, were those paid internships?
They were.
They were. Okay. So that's good too. Okay. So then you did this for about a year, and then you went from University of Michigan to McLaurin Greater Lansing.
Mm-hmm.
So what did that first job look like? Did you see an opening and apply?
Yeah, I mean, getting to the end of school, thinking about these student loans are going to start need to get paid. So it's just looking for a job, wanted to stay in Michigan at that time. So just looked for a job, applied.
So did the job require a nurse?
No. And I think that's really, really critical in this day and age. Even now, I can't make, regardless of my qualifications, I'm a CIC. I have I've got over 10 years in infection prevention. I cannot make it through a virtual screen online that says we require a nurse. And I think that's a shame. I think that in infection prevention, we have to open ourselves up to so many possibilities when it comes to who could do this job. The CIC doesn't have any restrictions for non-nurses to be able to take that role. It's very important that we think about people. When I remember in APIC Portland, it's 2017. I have the little my little badge hanging up in my office when I presented, and It was, I think that APIC National, they presented that over 50% of IPs are over 50, and how many people retired in the pandemic. So we have to think about building infection prevention in a way that we can't rest when it comes to recruiting. We can't rest. We have to find the right people. And just saying that you have to have something arbitrary like a nursing degree, which I'm not sure if different states have different requirements. I've seen that a couple of states in my own job searches and own learning have they really lean on that RN.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with those AI powered applications, if you're not an RN, you may not make it past that. I've had
Yeah,
that
they'll filter you out.
experience.
So let me tell you kind of my feedback on the job front, kind of working with clients, and then I want to hear your professional kind of thoughts on it. So number one, if you have a hospital that's, I'll say 150 beds or less, I'll say majority of the time they require an RN. That used to be because employee health was part of the job. Thankfully, that's no longer the case, and it's rarely combined. But still, most of your smaller facilities where you would be a sole preventionist, they are requiring a nurse. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, and if that's reasonable, or why that might be the case and why that maybe shouldn't be. And then the second one, you mentioned state-based. There are a few states like California is one, Pennsylvania is one. I think New Jersey is one, to where the information, or like the types of infections you have to report, are quite a bit larger. There's a lot more reporting that goes on. And it seems like those facilities really value nursing more so than others. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. The last piece where I've seen a nurse required is in magnet facilities, because my understanding is, I guess, a certain percentage of the staff, I don't know if it's infection, I assume it's just overall hospital, has to have a BSN, and there's got to be a certain percentage makeup of that facility that has a BSN in order for you to qualify for that magnet status. So a lot of your magnet hospitals that I've worked with will require not only an RN, but a BSN for that role. So those are the three kind of most prevalent times where I'm seeing nursing required this day and age. So if you could comment on the validity of that, just because I know a lot of this is based on history and just people just not willing to change, or not knowing that other people can do the job, because the person that was in the role for 20 years before was a nurse. So surely we need a nurse here. So yeah, I just want to hear kind of your thoughts on all of that, and if it truly is just a dated thing, or if there's more to it, or kind of, I don't know. I just want to hear a non-nurse's perspective on that.
Yeah, all those are really great. All those are really great thoughts, and I have opinions on all of them. I
Love
think
it.
my big overarching thought would be is, why would you limit yourself to a nurse when the CBIC doesn't? So think about, I work in rural Wisconsin. As you can imagine, our talent pool for individuals is small. So if I find someone with the right passion who can be taught, I hire people from all over the spectrum when it comes to experience, when it comes to past credentials. But when it comes to the job of being an infection preventionist, I can teach you a lot. I've had my first 2 IPs go from no IP experience to CIC this year.
Wow.
So we can teach you. If you want to be taught, we can teach you anything. What I can't teach you is passion. What I can't teach you is teamwork. What I can't teach you is those relational skills. What I can't, back up. What I can't teach is relational skills. So those are the things that I don't want to be limited by someone's academic background on. I need to be able to find the right person who fits in that role, whatever their background looks like. As long as they can sit for the CIC with their educational background and they can bring passion, knowledge, even if it's baseline knowledge to the role, I think we need to consider folks for infection prevention because the talent pool is only getting smaller if we put ourselves into boxes. I worked at a small facility, a smaller facility. Um, I don't see any benefit personally of an RN if they're a sole preventionist being there over an MPH. What I do see is oftentimes when an RN is placed there, they suddenly become part of the staffing pool. And that is completely inappropriate, especially when we think of the new ratios for infection prevention, which should be 1 per 69 beds. You can't pull them into staffing. And I saw that during the pandemic. And it's very, very difficult for people to be able to maintain doing that job as an infection preventionist and also being made to staff or supervise or something else. So just being really mindful of that. So I don't think that there is one advantage, one over the other, RN or MPH in those smaller facilities. When it comes to the state requirements, again, anyone can be taught. If you have a passion for learning and wish to be taught, I think that there's an opportunity for you. And relying on those old job descriptions to build the new ones really can eliminate great candidates. Not even just MPHs, but we think of the MLS side of things as well. So we think of those laboratory professionals who've come into infection prevention. That's kind of the third road when I think about infection prevention. It's really why would you want to limit yourself based on we all take the same CIC, we all have the same requirements. Why would we want to limit ourselves to something? Like I said, it really is about talent for the job. Magnet, I can understand why they need to have a certain amount of their talent pool to be a BSN, but I've also seen magnet facilities not require that nursing degree for infection prevention as well. So I can see it. I definitely can see it. The one thing I also want to say is infection prevention. This is something I have a kind of a strong opinion about. It doesn't necessarily need to be under a nursing branch. Sometimes infection prevention is thrown under nursing in a leadership perspective, but I think that limits the scope of infection prevention to say, well, this is a nursing task. Infection prevention is an everyone task. So ancillaries, nursing, docs, everyone needs to be involved in infection prevention. So it's really, we don't want to limit this as, oh, this is just a nursing thing. It's not. It can't be. So I sometimes see that disrespect when the leadership structure isn't aligned well, but it's really important to really be mindful that infection prevention isn't every one issue.
That's great. Okay, you said there's two things that I want to ask about that you mentioned. You talked about staffing ratios, which I want to hit on. You mentioned 1 in 69, I assume, full beds, occupied beds.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a state thing or is that a CIC thing? Where does that ratio come from?
That comes from a Bartles paper, Becca Bartles. Mm-hmm. She's one of the great researchers, Becca Bartles and Sarah Smathers, some of the best researchers we have out there with infection prevention. So when it comes to staffing, and that's really we think about that number, because the old number used to be 1 in 100. There isn't a staffing ratio when it comes to a federal or state law, to my knowledge. I think that would help us. We've seen what good has happened in California with a nursing ratio. Actually, where I think it could do the most good is long-term care. Yeah. Because now we're seeing dedicated FTE to infection prevention, but somehow that person's still staffing on the floor. So yeah, I think that's where there needs to be maybe the most focus, because I think that's where could be where there is the most need for standardization, for help, and serving some very vulnerable folks.
Yeah, and I know there's definitely people um, at APIC pushing for that, and we'll push for that as well because it's definitely needed. Um, is that a recent study, the one in 69?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's not, I
Uh,
mean, I would say it's pre-pandemic.
okay.
So it's probably 2019.
Okay.
If you want, I can send you the paper.
Yeah. Well, and I know both of those folks too, so I may just reach out and start that conversation there. Okay. So that's cool. So when it comes to your facility now, I'm going to jump ahead for a second. Is your leadership now on board with that same staffing ratio that people are recommending? And if not, how do you have you previously, how do you, like, moving forward, work to encourage them to actually follow that recommendation?
It's a presented ratio. I use it in all of my staffing assessments. And when I ask to hire, that's what I look for. Um, One of the issues that I have as a particular challenge is we have in our system a lot of very small critical access or small footprint hospitals. So staffing for that with geography, welcome to central Wisconsin in the winter. Everyone expects in-service IP, and yet there is so much snow. Um, but but we want to make sure that people also, we want to have really good work-life balance for our staff too, so they're not spending half their lives in the car as well.
Right.
So it's difficult. I think that's how we present things, but I also can appreciate um, everywhere folks are under a financial struggle and strain. So it's very difficult sometimes to present that case, but I think we've done a pretty good job so far of being able to support that. Um, what often happens, I think, is when we have role attrition, we're not able to replace, which is difficult.
Gotcha. Okay. Changing gears a little bit. You obviously, we've talked about being a non-nurse. Do you see, in hospitals with larger teams, do you see value in having a mixed background group of people? For example, if you could have an ideal situation, would you want two RNs, two non-RNs, and then two MLS, or two MPHs, two MLS, or I guess what's an ideal team structure for you?
For me, an ideal team structure is all about how diverse are our backgrounds. So I see my team, I have 15 direct reports right now. My team is one team, and every time we hire in, we think of how does this person's background, whether they're an RN, they're an MPH, they're an MLS, whatever their background, but what have they done? How does that add to our structure? So you really want to find people with a truly diverse set of experiences to add to your team. I think that more than background, that's what you want, a diverse set of experiences. When I think about nursing roles I love to hire from, I love hiring house supervisors. They are on, they're the on that spot problem solving thinker. I've hired house supervisors, old nurse managers, school nurses, tribal nurses. I have not hired a ton of MPH. We do not have the type of feeder program in my area that some areas might have more of. But I really look for those diverse sets of background. Where are you? What have you done? And what can you bring to the table? Healthcare, non-healthcare, that's really, we're looking for diversity of experience. We also think that, I think one of the things that has become even more ideal is centralized surveillance. I know that a lot of places are pushing towards centralized surveillance. I think maybe 10 years ago, certainly, but even 5 years ago, that was still seen as a little bit of a taboo subject. But I do have an MPH right now who works as my centralized surveillance person. And the amount that takes off of those in-person IP's plates is really extraordinary, to be able to serve them well. And for our IPs, they often want to be out at the bedside. They want to be on the floor. They don't want to be at their desk doing data. They want to be working with people. So it's a huge satisfier for them as well.
So when you say centralized surveillance, is that essentially just forming a surveillance team that's kind of what they handle, and then it allows your true IPs to be doing rounds and kind of out on the floor interacting with everyone? Okay. Yeah, there's definitely been a trend that direction the last 5 years or so. And I haven't heard any negatives about that. I mean, everybody that's made that transition seems to really, really appreciate that.
And for us, my big call on doing centralized surveillance is no matter what the IP makes the call, they're the final word on if something is an infection or not. Our surveillance person tees up the shot for them, helps do a lot of information gathering, but the IP makes the final call. And that allows the IP to be as invested in the case as if they did the majority of surveillance themselves.
Gotcha. So your surveillance team, what are their job titles?
I have a one.
Okay.
And her job title is a infection prevention analyst.
Analyst. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Jumping back to your career, let's go. Your first full-time IP job, which you mentioned, McLaurin, Greater Lansing. How big of a facility was that?
It's different now. They
Okay.
changed the facility. It was 309 beds over 2 campuses, right across town from each other. So not maybe about 2 miles away. So not too big. One much smaller facility that was only really orthopedics. It was kind of an orthopedic hospital, and the other more general.
Okay. So then what was the makeup of the infection prevention team that you joined?
So it was a 1.5 FTE team. I was the one, and
Wow.
I had a 0.5 FTE RN.
Okay. So then when you came into that role, were you the first non-nurse in
Yes.
infection prevention? Okay. Now I think you mentioned this, but how was that interaction? They kind of take you under their wing and kind of teach you what you needed to learn, or were you kind of off on your own to figure it out, or what was that?
I think
like?
I had to build a lot of relationships with people first, especially because the previous person who was there was there a long time, very ingrained in the community. Their husband was actually the COO at one point of the facility, so
Oh, wow.
very ingrained in the community. So I had big shoes to fill. But really just being able to get out and about. I did walking rounds every day. I still believe in doing walking rounds every day as much as you can, even if it's just part of your facility. People need to see your face. And then you start to build that trust and relationships with folks. So I think it was really being able to ask a lot of questions. And I got some people that were just mad that I didn't know the answer off the top of my head, and I had to look up things.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a lot of knowledge. I had a lot of microbiology knowledge in my back pocket. I had a lot of my MPH degree really helped as well. And a lot of it in the beginning was just understanding why are the processes the way they are for surveillance even, and why do we
Mm-hmm.
choose to do things this way? A lot of it was paper.
Wow.
A lot of was paper. It was paper almost up till the very end,
Wow.
and it was really a change. So
Okay.
it's being able to understand the role, and then again, once I was in meetings, being able to meet people, being able to understand who my allies were. That's where you kind of build off of those relationships, and you can ask to be part of the room and really be able to understand where those decisions are being made, as well as take opportunities to learn from staff. For the most part, people want to tell you what their days are like and the work they do. Um, And if you can tell a nurse, treat me like a student, they kind of, a lot of folks have precepted before, they kind of know what that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really being able to say, I know I don't know everything. I really want to learn from you, and to have that genuine engagement from people. And there are people that are going to say, absolutely not. That's not my job. I don't have time. And there are going to be people that say, sure, come alongside me.
Gotcha. One thing that kind of jumps out to me about your background, one, you go from an internship straight out of MPH school to running your own infection prevention program with a part-time FTE. Then, all right, so part of this is just unbelievable to me on the recruiting end. How did you land that job? That's a big jump from being, and I mean, I don't want to say an internship wasn't like a good role, because I'm sure there's a ton of learning that went on there. But to jump from an internship to being a manager over multiple hospitals, even though you didn't have the title, it doesn't look like, which I'll ask about in a second. But how did you land that job?
It was the most harrowing interview I'd ever been in, before or since. The infection preventionist who was outgoing just spent 20 minutes firing questions at me.
Wow.
Also didn't like that I had a nose ring at that period of time in my life. But just fire, like boom, 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 question, question, question. I have been interviewed more gently by CEOs since that.
Really?
And I guess I could hold my chops. It's also, we think about who wants to do this job and who can handle the job and the culture sometimes. It's, when there isn't a huge job pool, I guess they were willing to take a chance on someone and say, I have enough and I have the passion for it. So we'll move forward.
That's awesome. And talk to me just for a second about the title. And that's kind of want to hear your thoughts, because reading this, they gave you an infection prevention specialist title, even though you're managing a program. Was it always a specialist title, or did they give that to you because, okay, so that was already in existence. Did you ever, I guess, fight for a different title, or I guess, how long was that title okay for you?
It was I think it was fine until the end. I'm not really built on titles. I'm just there to, I'm there to do the work, whatever that looks like. It was hard because when you're not in the leadership, you don't get that automatic entry into leadership spaces, which it continues to be something that is difficult. In infection prevention, quite often we're not considered leaders, and we don't get access to leadership spaces automatically. Now, at least for my team, and again, it also shields some of my team from leadership responsibility. When someone says, well, they need to be on call for the entire facility. Well, no, they're not a leader. They're a staff person. If you need a leader, you can talk to me. Yeah. But it also is it's kind of a double-edged sword, for sure. I have a huge issue with work-life balance with my team. Like, I want to make sure that we have work-life balance. No one on my team is on call 24/7 except for me. And even that's not true. I know IPs at facilities that are staff people, they're not managers. They can never take a true day off. They're always somehow accessible. And that's really inappropriate, especially for
you wonder why
folks.
There's so much burnout. I mean,
yeah, no kidding. Especially for these folks that are not even considered leaders.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important to me. So I think the title was fine until I was ready for a director position, and that's really what I was looking for. I wanted something bigger, and I knew within the system at that time that was not going to be an option for me.
Gotcha. So you made the jump from an infection prevention specialist up to a director of infection prevention after 5.5 years. Makes a little more sense when you understand what the infection prevention specialist role was, being over a couple of hospitals. But at the same time, Marshfield Clinic's a big health system as well. So you made a big jump. Can you just kind of give an overview of what you're responsible for now?
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about that transition.
I interviewed with 4 hospitals. I started with 5. We now have 11, and 12 is going to open. So it's
wow.
I am direct supervisor for 15 reports. For most facilities, I am dotted line for 2 more IPs. That older relationships, newer acquisitions, that type of thing. So yeah, I'm the buck. I'm where it stops for my team, and I love that. I love being able to work with my team. I have such an exceptionally talented group of people that I work with. I have great leaders and mentors here. It's a very, very interesting environment. I've always wanted to work in rural healthcare. I I have a real passion for working with people who are not seen. And what I mean by that are people who are underserved in a lot of different ways. I really wanted to work for IHS, and I really wanted to work in rural healthcare. Those were really passions of mine. And that's what I'm doing now. I get to work with IHS indirectly, working with some of our service areas. And I get to work in rural healthcare, serving the folks that feed America. So it's pretty amazing. That's really, really cool. So yeah, mixture of accreditations. We've got state CMS, we've got rural health clinics, we've got ASCs, we've got just Joint Commission hospitals. So get to learn a lot of acronyms, lot of things to keep straight. Thank goodness there's a calendar, so I know who's open for accreditation at what time. But it's it's really a dynamic environment, that's for sure.
What was the transition like? And I guess you were over multiple facilities, but it was just you. You're kind of on the ground. You're doing rounds and whatnot. Now you're over so many hospitals. Is it more of a corporate position as far as, so you're now doing more, I'm assuming, kind of streamlining processes, getting all the hospitals on the same page, doing the same stuff. Is that so? How big of a change was that to jump into that role?
It was interesting. It definitely a big change. I was starting a lot of systemization at McLaren. I was leading our IP, our informal IP work group, when I had left. So I was already informally leading IPs into systemization. So that was really helpful. And I've done a transition. I always tell people the hardest one is isolation, and I've done it twice where we've had to align isolation policies across the system. So, but yeah, it was really understanding. We have all these facilities. Marshfield Clinic was still pretty new to the hospital game. We've only been in it really since 2017. So really understanding all of these new inpatient entities. Building and opening new hospitals. We have opened, oh golly gee, I'm going to say 3 new hospitals since we've been here, like from the ground up. So wow. It's being able to kind of go through that entire process as well, from the first shovel in the dirt and before that to the Joint Commission is here to do your first accreditation, or you're welcoming your first patient. So it's definitely interesting. It's huge. What I think, really in the beginning, so I started in 18 here, really just learning how people did things, why they chose to do things like that. I was asked in my interview what I would change, and I was really clear in saying, I have no idea what I would change because I don't know you yet. I would love to get to know you and understand what you would like to change. So And that was really important. Like I said, when I started, I had five five staff members. So over acquisition and changing roles and streamlining to a more corporate structure over time, that's where we got more people into the fold. And
Yeah.
the best thing about COVID and a ton of awful things is we have used more technology like this. We have those virtual interfaces with people. My team, the team chat's going right now as I'm talking to you. I have it muted, but it's going right now, and I have all of these IPs that talk to each other every day like they're sitting in the same hallway together. I work in the same building as only two of my reports. I spend a lot of
Okay.
time on the road. Um, it's very important for me to get that touch and feel of our facilities, to be able to walk, understand what my IPs are seeing, understand what their staff are feeling, what needs to be done. Most of my IPs are sole practitioners as well. So having
Hmm.
that network of people is so critical to help build them up and say, we once a day we get a, hey, have you ever seen this before? What do I do about XYZ issue? Yesterday it was, our plumber wants to know what to do with a plunger after using it, how to clean it and protect it. And I'm like, I have never heard that question before in my entire life. It's a good one, but I've never heard that before. And of course, down the chat was, yeah, this is what we have in a process. And I'm like, of course someone knows, because we between all of it, we've learned so
Right.
much.
That's awesome. When it comes to your day-to-day work, what's been the biggest difference between where you were at McLaurin to Marshfield? And I'm more talking about level of position.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't get that daily touch. I don't review labs every day. I don't do some of that. I do look at our reportables. I like to kind of keep my ear to the ground with different things, but I don't get that daily touch of infections. I don't do a lot of surveillance. I
mhm.
don't do as much rounding as my team does. So I'm more in that upper leadership structure, seeing where we can place IP to be a great part of the organization. So that's the biggest change, I would think. And I miss some of that. I do a lot of coverage. So every once in a while, it's like, I feel like a real IP today. Look at me
Yeah.
handling issues. So that keeps my brain sharp, and my staff like to bring me lots of things. We just worked with a local health department on a bolus impetigo outbreak related to one of our campgrounds in the area. So I did primary for that, and that made me feel like a real IP for a while. But that was really helpful, being able to do that interfacing with some of our public health organizations, or working with my team on critical issues, um, helping them with managing patient care concerns. So I answer a lot of questions, I think more than I ever did as a staff IP.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, last question, and then I'll wrap up because I don't want to keep you over time. Um, what's what's next? Um, Now, obviously, you got to be careful answering that question, and we'll decide what we actually want to put anywhere. But I'm more asking just because obviously there's career growth and infection prevention, but once you kind of get to a director level over 10 plus hospitals, there's not kind of like a standard next step. Um, I mean, you see AVP of infection prevention, that title out there, and that's starting to become more prevalent. But again, that's more of a title than anything.
Mhm.
And as you said earlier, titles aren't necessarily your thing. So, so theoretically, like I said, I'm not trying to figure out what you're doing, but as a person kind of following the career track, like what's next? Do you grow into quality or accreditation? Do you find one of the handful of hospitals that are bigger than what you're at now? I guess I feel like I've talked to several people at your level that it's kind of like, well, I'd love to continue to grow, but I don't really know. I don't know where, like, how it grows or what
Yeah.
I do. So I'm just curious if you've thought about that just as like I said, not you personally necessarily, but as a career progression, what does a next step look like?
Yeah, I think it's really hard in infection prevention because quite often when you want to go up, you have to leave. And for many of us, it's not leaving for the hospital down the street, it's leaving for the hospital across the country. Um, so that's huge. It's huge on families. It's huge on when you look to when there isn't a ton of career progression unless you're moving facilities. I see it all the time in my peers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just finding what you want to do and how you want to work. I think for me, what does long term look like? I always say when I grow up, I want to be a patient advocate. Um, it's one of the it's another field that you have to be a nurse to be in, and I struggle with that, but
Yeah.
I it's something I've become really passionate about in infection prevention. Is that I think every patient deserves advocacy. I think every patient deserves independent navigation through the system, especially with critical diagnoses. And we do have them in many different areas. I know a lot of people, heart failure, oncology, complex pediatric diagnoses. There's someone to help you just navigate what the heck are you going to do through this
Yeah.
system, all the doctors, all that. Um, that's something I'm really passionate about. I don't see quality necessarily as a long-term career path for me. Special an accreditation.
Yeah.
I have a high enough stress job. It's I don't know. I don't know what's next. What I want to do is continue to work for organizations that are really passionate about serving people and finding wherever that spark kind of lets me go. Um, will it mean potentially a downgrade in title? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But it's the where do I want to be? Who do I want to be serving? And for me, it's the who are those underserved? Who do I want to kind of see next in my life? So
Right.
yeah, I kind of keep my brain very open to what does next look like,
Yeah.
and you know, um, I'm fortunate. It's just my husband and I, so we're a little more mobile. I don't have any kids to worry about being in school, but
Yeah.
yeah, it could be very different, and where I'm kind of open to where adventure takes me.
Do you see a VP of infection prevention being a thing soon in health
I think
systems?
I see, you know what? I think I see it, but I also think we need to say that infection prevention is a service line in these organizations. Either quality is a service line, a true service line that doesn't need to report up, that doesn't have it's not stuck with nursing, it's not stuck with the docs, it's quality.
Yep.
Um, or we see infection prevention in a very similar way. They're very connected, quality and infection prevention. I have my quality colleagues. I love working with them. Of course, I learn from them incredibly, but I think we need to think about infection prevention with a different hat. And when we find respect for infection prevention, that's where we see some of those patient programs with some of the best numbers, the best results, the best staffing. That would be huge. I would think. You think about when I think about what's next, I think about do you go into a program that's really well staffed, or do you have to go into a program that you have to build?
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Voice for Infection Prevention. We hope you found our discussions informative and insightful. Remember to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with experts in the field, and don't forget to leave us a review to let us know what you think. For additional resources and to stay updated on the latest news in infection prevention, visit our website at voiceforip.com. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, stay safe and continue your commitment to excellence in infection prevention.